I thought the worst thing that could happen on our anniversary camping trip was running out of coffee. I was wrong. Dead wrong. Because when my husband Marcus got that text message, I realized we'd been living a lie for 3 years. Hi everyone. I'm Sarah, and I need to tell you about the most terrifying night of my life. Not because of what happened in those woods, but because of what I discovered about the man I married. What I'm about to share with you will make you question everything you think you know about the people closest to you. 3 days ago, I was just another 28-year-old marketing coordinator from Portland, planning weekend hiking trips and arguing with my husband about whose turn it was to do the dishes. I had the kind of life that looks perfect on Instagram stories. You know the type: matching coffee mugs, coordinated hiking outfits, and a husband who still opens car doors for me after 3 years of marriage. That husband is Marcus Chen, 30 years old, software developer, and honestly, the most dependable person I've ever met. While I'm the type who forgets to charge my phone and shows up to meetings 5 minutes late, Marcus is the guy who packs extra batteries for everything, downloads offline maps before we lose cell service, and somehow always knows which trail will have the best sunrise views. He's my steady rock in a world that feels like it's constantly shifting beneath my feet. When people ask me how we make it work, I always say the same thing. Marcus remembers what I forget, and I push him to be spontaneous. It's like we're two puzzle pieces that fit together perfectly, you know? He plans our adventures down to the last granola bar, and I'm the one who convinces him to take the unmarked path just to see where it leads. We've been together for 3 years, married 4, 2, and I genuinely believed I knew everything about him. I could tell you that he drinks his coffee black, that he gets this little wrinkle between his eyebrows when he's concentrating, and that he talks in his sleep but only in fragments that never make sense. I knew he had a scar on his left shoulder from falling off his bike when he was 12, and that he calls his mom every Sunday morning without fail. But here's the thing about thinking you know someone completely. It makes you blind to the signs that maybe you don't know them at all. The camping trip was supposed to be our thing. Every year we go back to the same spot in the Cascade Mountains where Marcus proposed. It's this beautiful clearing surrounded by towering pines about 2 hours from any real civilization. No cell service, no distractions, just us and the wilderness. Marcus always jokes that it's the only place on earth where I can't check my work emails. And honestly, he's not wrong. I was excited about this trip. Work had been stressful, and I was looking forward to disconnecting from everything. I had this mental image of us sitting by the campfire, Marcus reading one of his tech magazines while I worked on the novel I've been pretending to write for the past 6 months. Simple, peaceful, perfect. I should have known something was different when Marcus started packing 2 days early. It's always been prepared, but this time he was almost manic about it. He checked our supplies 3 times, updated our emergency contacts, and even printed out maps of the area, which he'd never done before since he knows those trails by heart. Are you expecting the apocalypse? I joked, watching him organize our first aid kit for the 2nd time. He looked up at me with this strange expression, like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Then he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Just want to make sure we're ready for anything. The time I thought he was being sweet. Overly cautious, maybe, but sweet. Now I realize he was preparing for something specific. Something he knew was coming. The drive up to the mountains was normal enough. We played our usual road trip games, sang along to our favorite playlist, and stopped at the same gas station. We always do for overpriced trail mix and terrible coffee. Marcus seemed relaxed, more like himself, and I started to think I'd imagined the tension from the night before. But as we got closer to our campsite, I noticed him checking his phone more frequently. Not constantly, but enough that I started to feel annoyed. This was supposed to be our disconnected time, our chance to focus on each other without the constant buzz of notifications and updates. Expecting an important call, Quay asked, trying to keep my tone light. No, he said quickly, maybe too quickly. Just checking the weather forecast. I didn't push it. Should have, but I didn't. Looking back, that might have been my first real mistake. Because if I'd asked more questions, then maybe I wouldn't have been so completely blindsided by what happened next. We reached the campsite just as the sun was starting to set, painting the sky in those perfect shades of orange and pink that make you understand why people become obsessed with hiking. Marcus immediately started setting up our tent with the kind of efficiency that comes from doing the same thing dozens of times. While I gathered firewood and organized our food supplies, everything felt normal. Everything felt right. I had no idea that within 24 hours, I'd be questioning everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and the man I'd promised to love forever. But that's a story for the next part. And trust me, you're going to want to hear what happened when Marcus got that text message. The Cascade Mountains in October are absolutely magical. Picture this: towering Douglas firs that seem to stretch up to heaven, their branches heavy with morning mist that clings to everything like nature's own special effects. The air smells like pine needles and wood smoke, with that crisp bite that tells you winter isn't far away. And the silence, not the kind of silence you get in the city where there's always some distant hum of traffic or construction, but real silence, broken only by the gentle rush of Bear Creek about 100 yards from our campsite. This place holds every good memory Marcus and I have built together. It's where he proposed 2 years ago, getting down on one knee right next to that massive boulder we call our rock. It's where we had our first real fight about whether we wanted kids someday, and where we made up 3 hours later sharing a bag of marshmallows and talking until sunrise. Coming here feels like coming home to the best version of ourselves. Our campsite sits in this perfect little clearing, surrounded by trees but open enough to the sky that you can see every star when the sun goes down. Marcus always sets up our tent in the exact same spot, about 20 feet from the fire ring, with the entrance facing east, so we wake up to sunlight instead of an alarm clock. He's got this whole system down to a science tent. First, then firewood, then food storage. Then the camp chairs positioned just right so we can both see the creek while we're cooking. Watching him work is like watching someone perform a dance they've perfected over years of practice. He moves with this quiet confidence, checking guy lines twice, making sure our cooler is properly secured away from any curious bears. I've always loved that about Marcus. The way he takes care of things, takes care of me without making a big deal about it. While he handled the technical stuff, I focused on what I do best, making our temporary home feel cozy. I strung up the solar lights we bought last year, set up our little camp kitchen on the picnic table, and arranged our books and games in the tent. It's funny how you can make anywhere feel like home with just a few familiar objects. Remember? Our first trip up here. I called out to Marcus as he tested the stability of our camp chairs. You forgot to pack a can opener, and we had to eat cold beans with a spoon. He laughed, and for a moment he looked exactly like the man I fell in love with. Hey, you forgot to pack spoons. We had to eat those beans with a camping knife. Not how I remember it, I said, grinning. That's never how you remember it, he replied. But he was smiling too. This is what I loved most about our camping trips. We fell back into this easy rhythm, this comfortable way of being together that felt effortless. No work stress, no social media, no friends asking when we were going to have kids or buy a house. It's just us, the wilderness, and all the time in the world to remember why we chose each other. But even as I was enjoying this familiar dance, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slightly off. Marcus kept pausing in his work to scan the tree line like he was looking for something. When I asked him about it, he'd shrug and say he thought he heard a branch crack or that he was just checking for wildlife. You're more jumpy than usual, I observed, watching him freeze mid-motion as a squirrel chattered somewhere in the canopy above us. Why? He resumed tying down the rainfly on our tent. I guess I'm just tired from the drive. But Marcus never got tired from 2-hour drives. He was the kind of person who could drive cross-country without needing more than a coffee break. Still, I let it slide. Maybe work had been more stressful than he'd let on. The first evening was perfect in all the ways I'd been hoping for. Cooked hot dogs over the fire, played cards by lantern light, and talked about everything and nothing. Marcus seemed to relax as the night wore on, and I started to forget about his earlier nervousness. You know what I love most about coming here? I asked him as we sat by the dying fire, my head resting on his shoulder. What's that? It's like the rest of the world doesn't exist. Like we're the only two people left on Earth, and that's perfectly fine with me. Marcus went quiet for a long moment, longer than felt natural. When I looked up at him, his jaw was tight, and he was staring into the flames with an expression I couldn't read. Yeah, he said finally, his voice strained. That's exactly what I love about it too. He said it like he was trying to convince himself, and that's when I knew something was definitely wrong. But before I could ask him about it, he kissed the top of my head and suggested we turn in for the night. Big day of hiking tomorrow, he said. But his smile seemed forced as we settled into our sleeping bags. I listened to the familiar sounds of the forest at night, owls calling, leaves rustling, the distant sound of water moving over rocks. These sounds had always been comforting to me, like a natural lullaby. But tonight, they felt different. Tonight, they felt like they were hiding something. I fell asleep thinking about the way Marcus had been checking his phone during the drive, about his nervous energy while setting up camp, about that strange look in his eyes when he said he loved. Being disconnected from the world, I should have trusted my instincts. I should have pressed him for answers when I had the chance, because the next evening, when his phone buzzed with that message, I would learn that our perfect little world was about to come crashing down around us. The second day started perfectly normal. We woke up to sunlight streaming through our tent, made coffee over the camp stove, and spent the morning hiking the ridge trail that overlooks the entire valley. Marcus seemed more relaxed than he had the day before, pointing out different bird calls and stopping to take pictures of me sitting on fallen logs like some kind of woodland fairy. For a few hours, I forgot all about his strange behavior from the night before. We spent the afternoon reading in our camp chairs. It's the kind of lazy, comfortable silence that comes from being completely at ease with someone. I was deep into a mystery novel when Marcus suddenly stood up and walked to the edge of our campsite, staring into the woods with that same intense focus I'd noticed yesterday. What is it? I asked, not looking up from my book. Thought I heard something, he said. But his voice sounded tight. I glanced up then and saw him standing perfectly still. His head tilted like he was listening for something specific. The way he was positioned, alert and tense, reminded me of a deer that's caught a scent it doesn't recognize. It's probably just a squirrel, I said, trying to lighten the mood. Or maybe a chipmunk plotting to steal our granola bars. He didn't laugh. He just stood there for another minute before slowly walking back to his chair. But even after he sat down, I could see him glancing toward the trees every few minutes, like he was expecting something. As evening approached, we fell back into our usual routine. Marcus built up the fire while I started preparing dinner. Nothing fancy, just hot dogs and beans, but it felt like a feast when you're surrounded by all that natural beauty. We were sitting on our camp chairs, eating off paper plates and watching the flames dance, when I noticed Marcus checking his phone again. I thought you said there was no signal up here, I said, gesturing toward his phone with my fork. There isn't, he replied quickly, shoving the device back into his pocket. I was just checking the time. Marcus, you're wearing a watch. He looked down at his wrist like he'd forgotten it was there, right? Yeah, just ... habit, I guess. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. Marcus doesn't do anything out of habit. He's the most intentional person I know, the kind of guy who has reasons for everything he does. The fact that he was checking a phone with no signal while wearing a watch and couldn't give me a straight answer about why it made my stomach twist with anxiety. Are you okay? I asked, setting down my plate and really looking at him. You've been acting weird since we got here. Weird how? But he wouldn't meet my eyes. Jumpy, distracted, like you're waiting for something to happen. He opened his mouth like he was going to say something, then closed it again. For a moment, I thought he might actually tell me what was going on. Instead, he forced a smile and said, "I'm fine, babe. Just tired, I guess." But I knew he wasn't fine. I knew him well enough to recognize when he was lying, and he was definitely lying. We finished dinner in uncomfortable silence. The easy rhythm we'd found earlier completely shattered. As the sun set and the forest grew darker around us, Marcus kept looking over his shoulder, scanning the shadows between the trees. Every little sound, a branch creaking, leaves rustling, an owl hooting, made him tense up. "Maybe we should go to bed early," I suggested, partly because I was exhausted from trying to figure out what was wrong, and partly because I hoped that tomorrow he'd be back to normal. "It's a good idea," he said, but he made no move to put out the fire or start cleaning up. That's when his phone buzzed. The sound was so unexpected, so out of place in our quiet campsite that we both jumped. Marcus grabbed for his phone so fast he knocked over his camp chair, and when he looked at the screen, all the color drained from his face. I'd never seen him look scared before. Not when we got lost hiking in the dark 2 years ago. Not when his dad was in the hospital. Not even during that horrible storm that collapsed our tent on our first camping trip. But right now, staring at that phone, Marcus looked absolutely terrified. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer. He just kept staring at the screen, his hands shaking slightly. "Marcus, you're scaring me." "What does it say?" He looked up at me then, and the expression on his face made my blood run cold. It was the look of someone who'd just received the worst possible news. "Get in the car," he said, his voice so quiet I almost didn't hear him. "Don't look back." "What?" "Marcus, what are you talking about?" "Sarah, please, we need to go now." He was already moving, grabbing our essential items with the kind of frantic efficiency that suggested he'd thought about this moment before. Our sleeping bags, the car keys, our water bottles. He knew exactly what to take. "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what's going on," I said, standing up but not moving toward the car. "What was that message?" For a moment, he hesitated. Then, with shaking hands, he held out his phone so I could see the screen. The message was from a number I didn't recognize, and it said, "You broke the rule." She wasn't supposed to remember. I read it twice, 3 times, trying to make sense of it. What rule? Remember what? And why did this anonymous person seem to know something about me that I didn't know about myself? "Marcus," I said slowly. "What the hell is going on?" He was already loading things into our car, moving with urgent purpose. "I'll explain in the car. We just need to go." "No," I planted my feet firmly. "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what this means." "What rule? What am I supposed to remember?" That's when I made the mistake of looking back toward our tent. Standing about 50 feet away, perfectly still among the trees, was a figure. Human-shaped, but too far away and too shadowy to make out any details. Just standing there, watching us. "Marcus," I whispered, not taking my eyes off the figure. "There's someone in the woods." Followed my gaze and cursed under his breath. "Sarah, get in the car, now." But I couldn't move. I was frozen, staring at this mysterious person who seemed to be waiting for something. The way they stood, so perfectly still, so patient, it was like they'd been there for hours, just watching us. "Who is that?" I asked. But Marcus was already grabbing my arm, trying to pull me toward the car. "I'll explain everything," he said, and for the first time since I'd known him, Marcus sounded desperate. "But we have to go right now." That's when I realized that whatever was happening, whatever, this message meant my husband had been expecting it, and that terrified me more than any stranger in the woods ever could. Standing there in the flickering firelight, that mysterious figure watching us from the woods, and my husband frantically packing like our lives depended on it. I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't getting in that car until I had answers. "No," I said firmly, planting my feet and crossing my arms. "I'm not running from something I don't understand." Marcos whipped around, his eyes wide with panic. Sarah, this isn't a discussion. We need to leave now. The hell we do. I'd never spoken to him like that before, but I'd also never felt so completely betrayed. I'm 28 years old, Marcus. Not a child you can just order around without explanation. He ran his hands through his hair. It's the same gesture he made when he was trying to solve a particularly difficult coding problem. But this wasn't a technical issue he could debug. This was our marriage falling apart in real time. You don't understand, he said, his voice cracking. There are things about your life, about us, that you're not ready to know. Try me, I shot back. Of course. Right now, I'm more afraid of the man I married than whatever's out there in those woods. The words hit him like a physical blow. He actually stepped backward, and for a moment, I thought he might cry. But instead, he pulled out his phone and stared at it like it held the answers to questions I hadn't even thought to ask yet. Many times have we been here, Marcus? I asked, watching his face carefully. And don't lie to me again. I can tell when you're lying. He was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. This is our 7th trip to this campsite. 7th. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. We've been married for 3 years. How is that possible, Sarah? ... He looked at me with such pain in his eyes that I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. There are things about your life, about what happened to you, that we decided you weren't ready to remember. We? Who the hell is we? Before he could answer, his phone rang. Not buzzed, rang. The sound of an actual phone call echoing through our campsite felt surreal. Like hearing a fire alarm go off in a library, Marcus looked at the caller ID and his face went even paler. He answered on the 2nd ring. This wasn't supposed to happen yet, he said into the phone, not even bothering with hello. No, she doesn't remember anything specific, but she's asking questions. I could hear a woman's voice on the other end, speaking quickly, but I couldn't make out the words. What do you mean the protocol changed? Marcus's voice rose in pitch. Nobody told me about any protocol change. Protocol. Like I was some kind of experiment. More talking from the woman on the phone. Marcus kept glancing at me while he listened, and with each word she said, his shoulders sagged a little more. I can't do that, he said finally. I won't do that to her. The woman's voice got sharper, more insistent. Because I love her, Marcus said, and his voice broke on the word love. The real her. Not the version you all want me to protect. That's when I started really looking at him. I mean really looking, like I was seeing him for the first time. There was a small scar behind his left ear that I'd never noticed before. His wallet sitting on the picnic table where he'd thrown it while packing had the corner of a card sticking out that I didn't recognize. And the way he was talking to this woman, it wasn't like he was getting instructions from a stranger. It was like he was reporting to a supervisor. Marcus, I said quietly, but he held up a finger, still listening to the phone. Fine, he said finally, but I'm telling her everything. She deserves to know the truth. He hung up and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Guilty, scared, but also relieved. Like he'd been carrying a massive weight and was finally ready to set it down. Who was that? I asked. Dr. Martinez, your ... your therapist. My therapist, Marcus? I don't have a therapist. You do? Just don't remember her? The way he said it made my skin crawl. Like my own memories couldn't be trusted. Like my own life was a story someone else had written. What don't I remember? I asked, but I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Marcus sat down heavily on Majin. Marcus sat down heavily on a camp chair, suddenly looking much older than his 30 years. 3 years ago, you were in an accident. A bad one. You suffered severe brain trauma and lost most of your memories from before the crash. The world tilted sideways. What kind of accident? Car accident? You were with ... He stopped. Swallowed. Hard. You were with your twin sister, Emma. Don't have a sister. You do. You just don't remember her. I felt like I was drowning in my own life. Where is she now? Marcus glanced toward the woods where the figure was still standing, motionless, among the trees. Sarah, I think she's here. That's when I understood. The figure in the woods wasn't a stranger. It was someone from my life that I'd forgotten. Someone who'd been watching us, waiting for the right moment to make herself known. The camping trips. I said, pieces clicking together in my mind. They weren't anniversaries, were they? No, Marcus admitted. They were therapy sessions. Controlled environments where you could safely access pieces of your past without being overwhelmed. And you? I looked at him like I was seeing a ghost. Who are you really? I'm your husband, he said quickly. That part is real, but I was also your therapist. I was assigned to help you recover, and I fell in love with you during your treatment. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Everything I thought I knew about our relationship, about how we met, about why he loved me. It was all built on lies. So our entire marriage is what? Some kind of therapeutic experiment? No, he said, reaching for my hand, but I pulled away. Sarah, what I feel for you is real. What we have together is real. How can I believe anything you say? I asked, tears starting to blur my vision. You've been lying to me for 3 years. That's when I made my decision. I started walking toward the woods, toward the figure who might be my sister. Sarah, don't. Marcus called after me. Not safe, but I was done with safe. With protection. I was done with living a life built on other people's decisions about what I could and couldn't handle. That's my sister, I called back over my shoulder. Then I'm going to meet her. And if you try to stop me, I'll never forgive you. Behind me, I heard Marcus curse and start following, but I didn't slow down. For the first time in 3 years, or maybe longer, I was making my own choice about my own life, even if I had no idea what. I was walking toward that figure in the woods was the longest 50 feet of my life. With each step, my heart pounded harder, and I could hear Marcus behind me pleading for me to stop, to come back, to let him explain. But I was done with explanations. I needed to see for myself who was waiting for me in those shadows. As I got closer, the figure became clearer. It was definitely a woman about my height with long dark hair that caught the moonlight. She was wearing jeans and a green jacket that looked oddly familiar, like something I might have owned once. She stood perfectly still, not moving toward me or away, just waiting with impatience that seemed almost supernatural. When I was about 10 feet away, she stepped into a patch of moonlight and my world completely shattered. I was looking at myself. Not exactly myself, but close enough that it felt like staring into a funhouse mirror. Same dark hair, same brown eyes, same facial structure. But there were differences. A small scar above her left eyebrow that I didn't have. Laugh lines around her eyes that were deeper than mine, and a confidence in the way she held herself that I recognized but couldn't place. "Hello, Sarah," she said, and her voice was like hearing an echo of my own voice from another room. My knees went weak. "Who are you?" "I'm Emma," she said softly. "I'm your twin sister." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually stumbled backward, and Marcus caught my arm to steady me. But I shook him off, unable to take my eyes off this woman who looked so much like me. "That's impossible," I whispered. "I don't have a sister. I would remember having a sister." Emma's face crumpled with sadness. "You did remember me, Sarah. You remembered me every day until 3 years ago." Behind me, I could hear Marcus on the phone again, his voice urgent and low. But I couldn't focus on what he was saying because my mind was reeling with impossible possibilities. "The accident," I said, memories trying to surface like bubbles in deep water. "Marcus said I was in an accident with my sister. We were driving." "To your engagement party," Emma said, taking a careful step closer. "You'd just gotten engaged to a guy named David, and you were so happy." You made me promise to do your hair for the wedding, and I said I would if you let me be your maid of honor. David. The name hit something deep in my brain, like a key turning in a lock I didn't know existed. I remember, I whispered, and suddenly, I did, David with his crooked smile and his terrible jokes. The ring he'd given me, not the one Marcus had used when he proposed, but a different one, with a small diamond and tiny sapphires around the band. I remember David. Emma smiled, and it was like watching my own face light up. You loved him so much. You used to call me every night just to talk about wedding plans. More memories were surfacing now, coming faster than I could process them. Emma painting my nails for prom. Emma crying when I got into college. Emma holding my hand in the hospital when our grandmother was dying. Emma, Emma, Emma. Years and years of memories featuring this person who was supposed to be the most important person in my life. What happened to David? I asked, though part of me was afraid to know. Emma's face darkened. After the accident, when you woke up with no memory of your previous life, the doctors thought it would be too traumatic to tell you about him. They said it was better to let you build a new life without the pain of loss. What pain of loss? David died in the accident, Sarah. You survived, but he didn't. The ground seemed to shift beneath my feet. I'd been married to Marcus for 3 years, believing he was my first real love, my only love. But there had been someone before him. Someone I'd loved enough to marry. Someone who died trying to get to our engagement party. And you. I looked. At Emma, this sister I'd completely forgotten. Where have you been for 3 years? Watching, she said simply. The medical team said contact with me might trigger traumatic memories, so I had to stay away. But I've been watching, making sure you were okay. That's when Marcus stepped beside me, his face grim. Emma, you weren't supposed to make contact yet. The timeline changed the moment you fell in love with her. Emma snapped, and I heard real anger in her voice for the first time. This was supposed to be therapy, Marcus, not a chance for you to build a relationship with a woman who couldn't remember her real life. I looked between them, understanding dawning like a horrible sunrise. You both knew each other. This whole time you've been working together. Not working together, Marcus said quickly. Emma's been part of your medical team's observation protocol, but we haven't been in contact. I swear to you, Sarah, I never intended for this to happen. For what to happen? For you to fall in love? With your patient. For you to marry someone who couldn't consent because she didn't know her own history? The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but I was beyond caring about anyone's feelings except my own. Sarah, Emma said gently, the medical team thought it was working. Stable in your new life. But then you started having dreams. Dreams. About me. About David. About your life before the accident. Dr. Martinez said you were starting to remember fragments. And that's when they decided it was time to tell you the truth. But Marcus disagreed. I said, looking at my husband with new eyes. I was scared, he admitted. I was terrified that if you remembered your old life, you wouldn't want the new one. You wouldn't want me, standing there in the moonlight looking. At my forgotten sister and my lying husband, I felt like I was meeting myself for the first time in 3 years. The Sarah who'd loved David, who'd had a twin sister, had lived a completely different life than the one I remembered. I need to know everything, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. About David, about the accident, about who I was before. All of it. Emma nodded. That's why I'm here. It's time for you to remember who you really are. But even as she said it, I realized that the question wasn't who I used to be. The question was who I wanted to be now, with all the pieces of my life finally visible. And I had no idea what the answer to that question might be. The next 3 hours changed everything I thought I knew about myself. We didn't leave the campsite that night. Instead, we sat around the dying fire, me, Marcus, and Emma, my twin sister who I'd forgotten existed, and I listened to the story of my real life. Emma told me about our childhood, how we'd shared. Everything from clothes to secrets to the chicken pox when we were 7. She showed me pictures on her phone, photos of us at Christmas morning, at high school graduation, at my college acceptance party. In every single photo, I was smiling at the camera, but I was also holding Emma's hand or leaning against her shoulder. We looked like two people who genuinely enjoyed being together. "You were my best friend," Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. "You still are, even though you don't remember me." She told me about David, too, how we'd met in college, how he'd proposed on the beach in Oregon with a ring he'd saved for 6 months to afford, how I'd called Emma at 2 in the morning to scream about the engagement. So excited I couldn't wait until morning to share the news. "You were going to ask me to be your maid of honor that night," Emma said. "At the engagement party?" "That's where." We were driving when the truck ran the red light. Marcus sat quietly through most of it, occasionally adding details about my medical treatment, about the months of recovery, about the decision to build me a new life rather than force me to confront the trauma of losing David. "The doctors thought it was kinder," he explained. "You were so broken after the accident, and when you woke up with no memory of David or the engagement, you seemed ... peaceful. They thought telling you about his death would destroy that peace. But as the night wore on, I realized that the peace they'd given me came at the cost of everything that had made me who I was. They'd created a simplified version of Sarah, one without grief, without complex family relationships, without the misances of real life." "I want to see his grave," I said suddenly, surprising myself. Marcus and Emma exchanged glances. "Sarah, are you sure?" Marcus asked. "Might be overwhelming." "Everything about tonight has been overwhelming," I said. "But I'm still here. I'm still okay. Maybe I'm stronger than everyone thinks I am." Emma smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her all night. "You always were stronger than people gave you credit for." We spent the rest of the night talking, and slowly more memories began to surface. Not everything the doctors had warned that some memories might never return, but enough to help me understand who I'd been before the accident. I remembered Emma's terrible cooking, how she'd burn water if you let her. I remembered David's laugh and the way he'd sing off-key in the car. I remembered feeling like my life was just beginning, like everything good was ahead of me. But here's the thing I realized as the sun came up over the mountains. I couldn't go back to being that. Sarah, 3 years had passed. David was gone. The life I'd been planning was over. But that didn't mean the life I'd built with Marcus was meaningless. "I need time," I told them both as we packed up camp the next morning. "I need time to figure out who I am when I'm not protecting myself from the truth, but I'm also not trying to live in the past." Marcus nodded, though I could see the fear in his eyes. "Whatever you need. I want to keep seeing Dr. Martinez," I continued, "but I want real therapy this time. Not managed recovery designed to keep me stable. I want to deal with the grief, the trauma, all of it." Emma squeezed my hand. "I'll help however I can, okay? And I want to know about our parents, about the rest of our family. I want to understand where I came from. Okay. But the biggest decision I had to make was about Marcus. Could I stay married to someone who'd fallen in love with a version of me that only existed because I couldn't remember my real life? Was our relationship built on love or on his professional need to help a patient? "I don't know if I can trust you yet," I told him honestly as we drove back toward Portland. "You made choices about my life without my consent. You decided what I could and couldn't handle. That's not what partners do." "I know," he said quietly. "I know I screwed up. I let my feelings compromise my professional judgment, and I let my fear of losing you compromise our relationship. But," I continued, "I also can't pretend that the last 3 years didn't matter. I did fall in love with you, even if it happened under circumstances that weren't completely honest. That's when I made my decision, one that surprised even me. I want to start over," I said. "Not go back to who I was before the accident, and not pretend the last 3 years didn't happen. I want to start fresh, with all the information this time." "What does that mean?" Marcus asked. "It means we're going to date, just like normal people do. You're going to court me, knowing that I know the truth about everything. And I'm going to decide if I want to be with you based on who you really are, not who you were pretending to be." Emma laughed from the back seat. "That's the most Sarah thing you've said all night. What do you mean? You always were the type to take a terrible situation and find a way to make it work for you? Even when we were kids, when Dad lost his job, and we had to move, you turned it into an adventure. Over the next few months, I learned to integrate all the pieces of myself. The Sarah who'd loved David, the Sarah who'd survived trauma, and the Sarah who'd built a life with Marcus. Wasn't easy. There were days when the grief hit me so hard I couldn't get out of bed. There were days when I was furious at everyone who'd made decisions about my life without asking me. But there were also days when I felt more like myself than I had in 3 years. Marcus and I did start over. We went on actual first dates, had real conversations about our values and our futures. Some days I could see the man I'd fallen in love with. Other days I wondered if we'd ever be able to move past the foundation of lies our relationship had been built on. Emma moved back to Portland to be closer to me. And slowly we rebuilt our relationship too. She helped me remember our childhood. Our inside jokes, our shared history. It felt like getting a part of my soul back. The most important thing I learned through all of this is that healing isn't about forgetting the painful parts of your life or being protected from difficult truths. Healing is about integrating all the pieces of yourself, the good and the bad, the joyful and the tragic, and choosing to move forward anyway. I'll never know what my life would have looked like if David hadn't died, if I'd never had the accident, if I'd been allowed to grieve and heal naturally. But I do know that the life I'm building now, with full knowledge of my past and conscious choices about my future, feels more real than anything I've experienced in 3 years. Sometimes, the people who love us most are the ones who hurt us deepest. But real love isn't about protection, it's about truth. And sometimes, the truth is the only thing that can set you free. Oh, and about that photo I found in my backpack. The one with me, Emma, and a third sister named Claire. That's a story for another day. Because it turns out there are still some secrets my family hasn't told me yet. But this time, I'm ready for whatever truth comes next. That's my story, and honestly, I'm still processing everything that happened. Some of you might be wondering what happened with Marcus and me. We're still figuring that out. We're taking it slow, rebuilding trust, and honestly, some days are better than others. Emma and I talk every day now, and she's helping me remember more about our childhood. It's like getting pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know was incomplete. The biggest thing I've learned from this whole experience is that sometimes the scariest truths are the ones we need to hear the most. If someone in your life is trying to protect you from something, maybe ask yourself if that protection is really about your well-being or if it's about their comfort. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever felt like there were pieces of your life that didn't quite add up, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Your experiences might help someone else who's going through something similar. And if you want to hear what happened when Emma finally told me about our third sister, Claire, make sure you're subscribed to this channel because that story is even more complicated than this one. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Before you go, if this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps more people find these stories. Share it with someone who loves a good mystery. And hit that subscribe button if you want to hear more true stories that will make you question everything. If you think you know about the people in your life, I'll see you in the next video. And remember, sometimes the truth is scarier than any fiction, but it's always worth knowing. Thanks for listening.